Gaming is dead. The focus on cinematics and realism is ruining AAA games. They're also very woke and have ugly characters that make my PP sad. New games suck, old games are the best.
It's political correctness gone mad.
You must have heard at least one of these complaints online, and they've only become more prominent over the last few years. Some of them are valid, some are exaggerated, and like always, some are just outright stupid. In reality, 2024 has actually had a lot of great games. Some of these have been widely recognized by both critics and fans alike, but there are others that either did not get enough attention or got too much attention for the reasons that had nothing to do with the actual game. And that's kinda sad because it has been a good year for video game-ass games. For the purpose of this video, we're going to define a video game-ass game as one where gameplay is king. It may or may not have amazing writing, it may or may not have high-quality cutscenes or visuals, but the gameplay will definitely stand out. Whether it's through giving you a lot of agency in how you approach objectives, or it'll let you do some weird shenanigans with the characters, or let you pull off some insane moves and combos, or it can be just pure game where nothing matters other than the gameplay. Put it like this, if gaming is a scale where on one extreme end you have Hollywood-ass games where most of the stuff happens in cutscenes and gameplay is either limited or too simplistic, the other extreme end is video game-ass games where gameplay matters the most and every game lies somewhere in between. And 2024 has seen some great video game-ass games. First, I want to talk about Indiana Jones and Great Circle, which was probably the most video game-ass game of the year. To be honest, when I first saw the announcement trailer for the Great Circle, I kind of disregarded it because it didn't seem very appealing. But actually playing through the game, I was so glad that Machine Games decided to make it a first-person immersive sim-like game instead of another cinematic blockbuster action like Uncharted. But it's not like Indy doesn't find himself in the middle of high-stakes action. Plane shootouts, boat shootouts, barely surviving through the skin of your teeth, it has all of it. But the slower and the more deliberate moment-to-moment gameplay is where the game truly shines. Combat mainly focuses on melee, whether you're punching your way through Nazis or sneaking up behind them and then sliding a guitar between their legs just to smash them in. And the satisfying sound that the enemies make when you bash their head in is just the cherry on top. It's little details like this that make Indy and the Big Gola so fun to play. For instance, another cool detail is the translucent bottles and how the surroundings look through them. Not having this stuff wouldn't have affected the gameplay at all, but it adds to the immersion. After all, attention to detail is what sets great games apart from good ones, and I love to see the devs do everything they can to bring their vision to life. And the way they've incorporated the whip in the game is just...
I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
In addition to using it in platforming to climb and swing your way through the levels, it can also be used to disarm and yank enemies. Not to mention, the whip is the only way you can get rid of dogs because the game won't let you shoot them or punch them. How cool is that? It also makes combat more fun because you can make an enemy drop their weapon and then just use it against them. The puzzles are another highlight. They're easy enough that you won't get stuck, but not so easy that you don't need to pay attention. And this applies to story-related puzzles as well as random safes and chests that you can find while exploring Nazi camps. The story is pretty straightforward, but what I love about it is the way the side quests tie into it. The game calls them fieldwork, and you can completely ignore them if you want, but each fieldwork adds important context to the story and the characters involved, and it really fleshes out the entire experience. But if you do skip them, you might miss out on some cool encounters like Indy the Priest taking a hilarious confession. And even with all the systems working under the hood, Indiana Jones and the Grand O does not compromise on the production quality. Whether it's cutscenes or the general levels themselves, the lighting is amazing. Characters and environments are highly detailed, the textures look great and your surroundings feel alive, regardless of whether you're in the crowded streets of the Vatican or the island jungles of Sukhothai. Most of the game is slower paced, but when the action hits, the game doesn't hold back at all. It really hits the spot when it comes to balancing gameplay with cinematics. The acting is superb on all counts too, especially with Emmerich Voss. And might I add how refreshing it is to have a villain that's just a bad guy. No sob story that makes you relate to him or makes you feel bad for him. And he has some iconic dialogue too. Just see for yourself.
While you were playing your pointless game, I was playing you. Willensschwache Männer sind am einfachsten zu manipulieren. Your weakness for the fairer sex has caused you to make many questionable decisions.
Now, Indy is no stranger to jank. There's a certain wonkiness in animations, and character dialogue will sometimes just trigger at random with them speaking over each other. And torches and fire in general will always start spazzing out. The game does all kinds of weird shit, but in a ha-ha funny way, not in a bad way. Look at Voss in this scene. The texture they've used for sweat on his face is just floating on top of the face. And to me personally, the intro mission to the game is just uncanny valley. I understand that it's an homage to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I think that it's also the worst part of the game where you can see almost every issue within the first 10 minutes. But here's another way to look at it. During the first 10 minutes, you've seen everything that sucks about the game. So if you can put up with that, it won't bother you again, and the game only gets better from there. Because ultimately, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle feels so good to play that the jank didn't bother me at all. At its worst, it just made me laugh. But enough about Indy's misadventures. I want to talk about some more games. Astrobot proved that Sony is still capable of putting out games that aren't just another cinematic, third-person, over-the-shoulder title with hours and hours of cutscenes. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was another incredibly video game-ass game that was one of the biggest games of the year. I don't think anyone needs to be reminded of how much any Yakuza title is a video game-ass game, and I'm not even going to mention what I like to call crack in video game form. For real though, the first time I played it was at 11 PM on a Friday night, and the next thing I knew, it was 6 AM in the morning. Now, these titles and some others have been recognized far and wide for their achievements with both critical and popular acclaim. Plus, this video is already kinda long and there's only so much of my own voice that I can stand while editing, so I'm mainly going to talk about 4 games, 2 of which I feel deserve more attention, and another 2 which in my opinion got all kinds of wrong attention where people just completely lost the plot, which seems to be a growing issue. There are more games from 2024 that I would like to talk about, but we'll tackle that in a separate video. First up is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. This was Ubisoft's first game of 2024 and also their best. And it was a reminder that Ubisoft still knows how to make a good game. The gameplay is tight, the environments and challenges are top-notch, platforming is incredible, and the combat slaps hard. But still, it didn't sell well. Partly because people think that Prince of Persia did not exist before the Sands of Time and the Two Thrones, but mostly because Ubisoft shot themselves in the foot with multiple bullets. One was their unreasonable expectation that a Metroidvania game, a genre that's relatively niche to begin with, would sell millions at launch. The second bullet was that they expected this with a launch price of $50. For perspective, most games in this genre, albeit they're indies, launched at somewhere between $15 to $30. And the third bullet was that Ubisoft expected millions in sales while not even having the game on Steam at launch. And as a result, they've now disbanded the team that made the game. I can only say one thing to their management.
Hospital called. Your test results came back positive. You're a stage 5 dumbass.
But the fact remains that The Lost Crown is the best Ubisoft game in a long time and definitely deserved a better fate. Moving on, we have Infinity Nikki. Now, I know it's already gotten tons of attention, after all, it made millions of dollars within days of launch. But I haven't really seen any chatter about it outside of gacha circles, so I think there's still room for it on this list. Because even though I despise the entire gacha genre, and I've never cared at all about dress-up games, I have to admit, Infinity Nikki is good. It's Disney meets Barbie in the most amazing way possible. And I don't mean modern day Disney that wants to ruin everything with live action remakes and crappy Marvel writing where everything needs to have a joke or a quip.
I was willing to do anything he wanted. If he asked me to burn the world down, I would have asked him.
Beef or vegetarian?
I'm talking old school Disney with their fairy tale adaptations where everything is magical and you can overcome every adversity through the power of friendship. Because that is quite literally what happens in Infinity Nikki on more than one occasion. It is perhaps the most whimsical and calming game I played this year. It's bright and vibrant and colorful, and at the same time it's just so warm and pleasing to look at. The characters, whether they're human or otherwise, whether they play a role in the story or they're just random creatures in the world, all have very cutesy designs. Even the names are just downright adorable. The game has special outfits called ability outfits, which help you explore the world and collect different resources. One of them allows you a quick float in the air, another one lets you glide over long distances, there's one you need for fishing, another one that shrinks you tiny, and so on. The whole game revolves around collecting and crafting outfits, but the way the devs have crafted a story and an entire world around it, turning into a big adventure, is really impressive. Combat is basic and bare bones, but even with just a couple of fighting mechanics, Nikki manages to pull off some decent moves. The story is pretty simple and straightforward as well, but it takes you places. And even though most of it comes across as very positive to the point of being kinda naive, there are times when it gets dark. And as far as the dress-up part of the game goes, well, that's really up to you. Because as someone who has absolutely no eye for fashion, I completely ignored that aspect and still didn't face any issues progressing in the game. Each part of an outfit has stats, like an elegant rating or a cool rating. These ratings are used to allot points when you have a styling competition which requires you to follow a theme. So I just upgraded and put on items that would get me the most points, and that was it. Just focusing on the story, which is what I did, gives you plenty of resources to upgrade outfits and buy new ones. I was able to finish the entire story without needing to spend a single dollar, and the gacha bit for me was limited to pulls using whatever crystals and in-game currency I got by playing the game, and the story took me less than 20 hours to finish. But if you're someone who actually likes dress-up games, oh boy do you have a lot to look forward to. Each and every element of clothing seems to have so much care and attention to detail. I can imagine folks who enjoy fashion spending hours gathering the materials to craft the perfect outfits for their tastes. Not to mention, the game has tons of mini-games, really, all kinds of them. As IGN would say, this has a bit of everything for both sides. And don't you dare pretend that, ooh, dress-up games are girly and I need manly man games. Because I remember another game in which finding outfits was a major part of the game, Stellar Blade. And the sexy outfits and poses seem to be the only thing a lot of people want to talk about online. Guess what? Between Eve's tits and ass, it's not just more skin. There's also an incredible action game that so many people conveniently forget. Stellar Blade has some initial friction in gameplay, but it doesn't take long to become a really fun game with great combat mechanics. It's snappy to control, it has some flashy and polished moves, and it lets you pull off some insane combos that are both really satisfying to execute and watch. And it tops that off with some beautiful art design, memorable music, and some very interesting world building. And while the story and the narrative don't hit the same highs, Stellar Blade actually poses some very relevant and philosophical questions, you know, if you're capable of paying attention to anything other than what's jiggling right in front of you. But hey, it's all about winning that culture war, right? And obviously, posting a screenshot of Eve's cleavage is gonna get you more clicks, so who cares about anything else? And this brings me to another game that falls in a similar bracket, Black Myth: Wukong. Now, everyone is so hellbent on either turning this game into the savior of the entire industry or putting it deep down in piles of shit that people, especially on Twitter, have lost all sense of any rationality or just basic human sense for that matter. The fact that it recently won Game of the Year in the Steam Awards only seems to have added more fuel to the fire. My personal views about the game aside, Wukong does some things that are undeniably good. First, like Stellar Blade, this is a very well-made action game. Animations are intricate and fluid, combat feels really good for the most part, and the movesets for the bosses get more and more impressive as you progress through the game, and the spectacle just gets bigger and bigger. But the biggest accomplishment of Black Myth: Wukong, in my opinion, is the level of production quality it manages to achieve with its $43 million budget, which is measly when compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to make the AAA blockbuster games these days. Yes, Wukong still has performance issues and it doesn't have the same level of polish as a Santa Monica or a Naughty Dog game, but it was also made on a fraction of the budget and it's Game Science's first major console release. Now, you might say this isn't a good comparison because Wukong was made in China, Western and Eastern economies work differently, cheaper cost of labor and all that stuff. So here's Final Fantasy XVI for comparison. Mind you, this was not a comparison of which game is better, that's not what this video is about. But consider this. Final Fantasy XVI reportedly had a development budget of $59 million. And it doesn't matter how much more I personally love the boss fights in Final Fantasy XVI, there's one thing I have to admit. What Black Myth: Wukong is able to achieve with a smaller budget and a smaller, not to mention a less experienced team, is more impressive. For example, every chapter in Wukong ends with a short movie which provides you context to the characters, the lore, and the world. Each movie has a completely different art and animation style. The levels are mostly linear but still showcase a real sense of grandeur, and the scale is nothing short of incredible. The amount of effort and care that has been put into this game is very clear. And let's not forget, Final Fantasy XVI launched with a lot of performance issues as well. But obviously, none of that matters because the people who vote in the Steam Awards are stupid, the people who vote in the Game Awards are stupid, and the only people who are smart are the geniuses who do nothing but bitch and whine on Twitter. So what's the point of this video? First of all, go play Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. It's one of the best games of 2024 and a slap in the face to every single person who saw this one screenshot and turned into a whiny little baby. Second, just get your head out of your asses. Reading stuff online, it's apparent that people who are overly critical of games like Black Myth Wukong, as well as the ones who can't stop glazing them, don't really have an interest in actually playing the game themselves. The best example of this that showed up on my timeline was this modern day messiah who's saving the gaming industry from the woke. Tons of tweets about how game science is being treated unfairly, about how Wukong is single-handedly going to save gaming. You get the gist. So obviously, he would have had to have played the game, right?
Absolutely.
Wrong.
Guess again. But really, how can I put all the blame on people like this guy when we have industry professionals themselves stoking the flame? I'm sure a lot of people must have seen Elmo's tweet about Avowed. Now, this post was stupid enough to begin with because fantasy, by the very definition of the word itself, means made up. You know, not real. So common sense would argue that a fantasy game is one where pronouns of any kind would be acceptable. But that's not the point. A director at Avowed tweeted this in response. I understand that it has to be a bit exaggerated because I doubt that a high-level person at Obsidian is just sitting down putting stuff in his game solely for the purpose of pissing off one person or one group. But please, someone explain to me, what is the actual point of this response? Because the only thing you've done is laid a trap for yourself. If your game does well, at best, people are gonna forget you said this. But if there's any chance that Avowed does not do well, it'll all be blamed on this one thing. I'm still looking forward to Avowed because obviously one person does not represent the entire studio and I love Obsidian's work. Tyranny is one of my favorites and I'm playing through Pentiment these days, which is phenomenal. And from what I've seen of the game so far, Avowed looks very promising as well. And that's the thing. Your team already has the pedigree of making some incredible games. So what's the point of indulging this crap? We've seen time and time again, it doesn't matter how woke or anti-woke a game is, good games will end up selling, sooner or later, and bad games, soon enough, will die off. Because it doesn't matter what the creators or the critics have to say, ultimately, the game speaks for itself. So, stop falling into this sad little culture war and try to understand that the gaming industry has much bigger and more pressing issues than stopping the woke mind virus or owning the Jutes. And remember, good games are still coming out in droves every year at every level. So, play more games, spend less time on Twitter, and most importantly,
Don't be a goddamn idiot.